There we go. Okay, cool. So we're just going to go straight into it because why not? Bear with me as I resize my screen. Probably should have done that before I click the record button, but oh well. Okay, cool. So to start off, I do have to do the usual 100% engaged, but you guys, once again, are already awesome people. Always do those things. I don't need to say that, but I'll go over it. Best practices, hungry for growth, and having personal clarity. So as I talked about, I'll get to kind of talk about all of these things. Next key staff event is going to be April 3rd on flatware and accessories. So John Roach will be talking about that one. So that can be something you guys can look forward to as well. And now you know, and you have the heads up on it. So let's just dive into it though, is how to start your personal growth journey, how to really dive into these things. Okay, so first one, I would just say it was a little quote that I saw, and I was just like, oh, let me just throw it in there. But it's that your competition isn't other people. I've talked to Leo about this, and even other assistant managers when they're going after big goals in general, is that they're always like looking at what other people do. And I think it's always important to really look at what you're doing. Before you can start to look at others. Your competition is your procrastination, your ego, the unhealthy food that you're consuming, the knowledge you neglect, the negative behavior you're nurturing, and your lack of creativity. Compete against that. And I think that's always a good place to start, is like, hey, how can I work on myself first before I start to look at what other people are doing? Because everybody's running their own race. And I think that's an important concept. Even myself, I had to like look at this past year where I was just like, okay, it doesn't really matter what everybody else is doing. I just need to do what I have to do for whatever for me to grow, for me to be healthier, for my mental capacity, for my business to do well. I just have to focus on me in order for me to do well. And I think it is important a little bit to be, I don't even want to say positively selfish. I'm just going to say selfish. Like, I think it's important to be selfish sometimes. And I know it kind of has a negative connotation of like, oh no, you should always give back to others. And I think that's important. And I think there's a time and place for both. I think there's times when you can give to other people, give them your energy, your time, all that. But there's also, you should set boundaries where you're taking care of yourself. And I think this is a good point into going into personal growth, is like, hey, how can I focus on myself now? So the first one I wanted to talk about is actually one of my favorite things. I read it the first time in this Miracle Morning book. You guys have all probably heard of it by now. If you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. It was one of like the first books I think I read getting back into personal growth. And I think it was a really good jumping point or starting point. But was this little book, and it's super thin. I don't have it. Leo stole ours. But it's a really, really thin book. It's probably like 100 pages at max, but it just talks about a morning routine. Okay, but what I liked in it is in the beginning of the book is he said that he wanted to figure out, I guess, the areas of improvement that he did have. But sometimes it's hard for us to look at our own selves without being, I guess, really critical and a little bit more self-deprecating. Okay, but having other people like just give us some feedback. And so what it was, and the book basically asked, when he sent the email, it's like, hey, could everybody just give me, 2 criticisms? Okay, and not like a criticisms of just feedback, like, hey, things that you noticed about me that you feel like I could improve on, like my areas of improvement. And if you want to throw in positive things in there as well. So I added positive stuff because I also would like positive things on top of feedback. But I thought it was an awesome email to send out. And if I'm being honest, I didn't get like a huge response from it, but it was really cool to be able to see other people's opinions of like, oh, well, you're a very positive person. You lead a lot with the heart, but sometimes you can be a bit of a pushover and you let people walk all over you. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's probably an important thing to know. And it was an important thing to know, especially going into management, or how sometimes I do let my circles of influence really affect me and like my mindset and how I'm doing things, and looking at other people's races really did then affect my own race. Okay. And so I thought it was just a really cool little just jumping point. When I read that book, I was like, oh man, this is awesome. I want to do this. I want to ask people, what do they think of me? What is their background? What is their thoughts on me? And asking not only people like in the business, asking people in different reigns of your life as well. Maybe it's an old job that you had and this person hasn't seen you in a bit. Maybe it's your current job. Ask your manager or coworker, ask family. I sent it to everybody in my family where I was like, hey, give me feedback. Like, what are 2 areas of improvement that you've noticed since you've known me my whole entire life? You could probably give me the best feedback, and maybe they won't. And I'm not saying that you have to take every single one. And like, this is a very important thing to remember, is because you will be asking probably like 10 to 20 people, if you do end up doing this email, and I'll post it in the TLA chat, you will probably asking like 10 to 20 people for feedback. You do not have to take every single piece of feedback and be like, okay, everybody said I'm really bad at this. I have to work on this. But maybe start to see where like things connect, where like it came up a lot in different areas of things, and you even noticed it in yourself of like, hey, you know what? I probably could improve on this. This is an area I can get better at. And I think it's a great place to now pinpoint certain things that you want to grow in. And it doesn't always mean that you're going to be the best in it. It doesn't mean that you're going to be perfect at it now, but it is good to be aware. And I think that's always an important thing. It's just being aware of like where your pitfalls are. So that would be my first one, is sending this email blast and asking for feedback, asking for even little criticisms. My assistant managers know I'm a huge person on this, but maybe I'm not as positive with them. I'm like, tell me what I suck at. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, no, tell me what I suck at. What am I bad at? And they've told me, and I think it's really helped me as a manager, even getting better, where they're like, oh, well, the team sometimes doesn't always feel like a team, or, you know, that you could improve here. Or maybe if you said this more, I'm like, okay, cool. And I want to take that feedback. And like I said, sometimes it's with a grain of salt, but if I've heard it enough times, I'm like, hey, maybe this is something I should actually start to look into. And maybe this is something I actually want to improve on. So like I said, I'll post that email blast. I'll have to steal my book back from Leo since he's had it for a year. But I will get that. But once again, the book is Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. So if you haven't read it, highly, highly recommend. Once again, it's like this big. You could all probably finish it in a day. So, but going into my next one. And going into my next one is create a routine. Okay, create a routine. A morning routine, evening routine are usually the ones I recommend. And I'm not saying that your routine has to be perfect. Even in that book, he gives a morning routine. It's the lifesavers. Okay, so it's the lifesavers. And that one is silence for meditation, A for affirmations, V for visualizations, E for exercise, R for reading, and then the last S is for scribing. So that's the savers. Okay. And that's his morning routine. So he does all of those within an hour. So it's like just a jam-packed morning routine. If I'm being honest, I definitely tried it for at least a year or two, and it's just not really a perfect routine for me, because sometimes some things will fall off and I'm like, oh, this is way too much. I don't want to do everything. To me, the best and most simplest routine that you probably could have, especially for a morning one, is just seek water, seek sunlight, and seek movement. Okay, seek water, seek sunlight, seek movement. I did steal this from somebody, by the way. So I got this from one of my coaches and mentors. But I think it's one of the best ones, because even when I'm feeling like maybe overwhelmed in the morning, I think it's just an easy thing to just be like, okay, cool. Let me drink a whole bottle of water. Okay. Because you're dehydrated, by the way. So make sure you drink water. Very important. Okay. But, you know, let me just drink a whole bottle of water. Sometimes it's about 16 ounces to 32 ounces of water. I see Jordan's already drinking her water. She's like, oh, you're right. I'm like, I know. But making sure you guys do that. Okay. And then seek sunlight. Usually for me, it's just walking my dog. So I get to do both. So it's just seek sunlight and movement. I get to get out there, because I've also noticed when I'm like inside all the time, I do start to get tired. I'm just kind of a little drained. I haven't seen the sun in forever. So I think that's an important thing sometimes, to just take a moment and just walk outside. Okay, just get the sunlight, just walk a little bit. Doesn't have to be far or anything like that. My dog is already telling me that he needs to go. So, okay, but I think that's an important thing, is that simple little routine can get your day started and change things fundamentally for you, because you're just like, wow, I just feel good. I've gotten that movement. I've got my blood working. I got my water in. And just like I said, sunlight. Even my mom was saying, because she works night shift, she's like, I think I like am sunlight deprived. She's like, I think that's why I'm so tired, is because I sleep during the whole entire day and then work at night. And so even her, just like implementing that, and that'll be the next thing I talk about, is standard over schedule. But a small routine. And then as you start to get better at your routine, where you just wake up at a certain time, you can start to add things. Okay. Maybe you really like meditating. Maybe you really like journaling, which I will also talk about. but starting to find a routine that works for you. Even take those lifesavers, take all 6 and do all of them in one day and just figure out like, okay, which one of these did I really like and I was gaining a lot of value from? Like for me personally, visualization is just not something I ever got anything from. I wasn't somebody that could sit down and like picture all the things that I wanted to do and how it would come out. And it was cool every now and then, but it wasn't something I probably would do in all of my morning routines. But affirmations, I love affirmations. I think they're one of the best things ever where you get to tell yourself positive things. In his other book, The Miracle Equation, he does talk about how to create affirmations and your miracle mantra. Also, one I would highly, highly recommend. If I'm being honest, I actually prefer that one over the Miracle Morning, is The Miracle Equation. I read it in my 2019 branch, and it was just revolutionary for me. I thought it was phenomenal. But I love affirmations, getting to tell yourself positive things and start to, I guess, even say reprogram your brain. And when I do talk about affirmations, it's not like you have to make sure you don't do affirmations that your brain can't believe. Okay. Of like, oh, I'm going to become a millionaire. It's like, okay, but how? Like, I think when you just say things like that, your brain's like, okay, but how? Okay. Where like I have a simple one for myself because sometimes I don't think of myself as a top level person, but I'll just say it. Even when I give talks, is like, hey, I have everything within me to be a top level person. Okay? I have everything within me to be a top level person. And that's just a little affirmation that I could say before every talk that I give, every event I speak at, because sometimes I get a little nervous from like, oh man, there's all these people who've done like $1 million or sold this much. Like, why do they want me to speak? Okay. But having just that little affirmation I could tell myself, and it's something that I can logically like latch onto. I can be on board with it. It's not something that doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, well, maybe I'm not a top level person right now, but I do have everything within me to be a top level person. I can keep working towards that. He even has some that I can also share. He has easy money ones. We're just talking about, hey, I'm going to learn and continue to grow my money mindset. I commit to reading something every day when it comes to money. And so those are affirmations that, once again, your brain can actually latch onto. It doesn't disconnect from them of like, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, hey, this is something I can work towards. And then, like I said, you start to just reprogram your brain in a positive sense. So I like affirmations. So meditation, I have a couple recommendations there if you guys do want those. There's the Headspace app, which I did like for a couple years. My personal favorite right now is the Balance app if you are a meditation person. It has different ones when it comes to speaking. Guided meditations, there we go. Guided meditations, different voices, different levels that you can do. So highly recommend those. I think those are the biggest things when, like I said, when it would come to a morning routine, but just create one. Maybe for you, it actually is an evening routine. Maybe you don't have a morning routine. I think both is important, but you can start with one. But an evening routine of like, hey, how do you shut down for the day? How do you get ready for the next day? Okay. Like personally, I have a digital sunset. And so an hour before I go to sleep, I put my phone away. And I just find whenever I do this, I actually just sleep better. Even if I don't do the full routine, and just putting the phone away 100% changes how I sleep. You guys know all the articles about like these things are pretty bad for us, especially when we like sleep near them. So all the waves and all that. It's really great. It's positive when you read them. But what I do is I had to get permission from my wife, but I put this in the bathroom, okay, which is very loud. So she hated it at first when I didn't warn her that I would do this. But I put my phone in the bathroom an hour before I go to sleep. So it's really far away. So when the alarm goes off, I have to wake up because I have to now go to the bathroom to turn it off. Okay. But I think it just allows me to shut down better for the day. I usually read before I go to sleep. And I'm somebody that does read 2 books. Usually when I'm reading, I have personal growth in the morning to like start my day off. And then in the evening, I read something for fun. I'm rereading Percy Jackson right now because why not? It's fun. And I love those books. So it doesn't always have to be something personal growth, but I think just like getting your body in the habit of just reading is a really good thing. I think it keeps your brain fresh. Drinking a certain amount of water before bed, probably not too much because then you have to wake up to go pee, just throwing that out there. But like 8 ounces before bed is a big one. But that's like my simple routine. I don't have anything crazy when I go to sleep. I just make sure that my phone's away. I spend time with my wife. We read together. I drink some water and I go to sleep. But it allows me to shut down a lot better before the night ends. So then I can wake up a lot better. Cool. So like I said, get a routine, whatever works for you. Look up some stuff, research things, but just find what is a good groove for you to start or end your day. And like I said, just pick one. Okay. Pick one or the other. Hey, I want to do a morning routine. I want to do an evening routine, and then slowly start to do both. Because I think both really, really shape and like finish out your day. You can even add journaling to them, but I'll get to that in a bit as well. Right now, actually. Okay. So keeping a journal. Now, I am not the most consistent when it comes to journaling, but I do know that it helps a lot. Okay? It helps a lot. Okay? Keep a journal. Now, for me, journaling also can encompass a lot of things. This can be in the morning. I think I have one of my old ones. Okay? In the morning and night, I actually used to journal. Now I kind of just journal for different emotions and feelings that I'm having, which I'll get to. Okay. But in the morning, I basically had my morning routine. And so I would write down 3 gratitudes, because you can't be mad if you start with 3 gratitudes in the morning. Like, how can you? Okay. But I would write down 3 gratitudes. And if I was doing this for a week, I had to make sure the gratitudes were different. Okay. So it was kind of just like a little, I don't want to say a challenge for me, but I wanted to make sure I didn't just cop out and write my wife and dogs every single day. So I wanted to make sure I really thought of things that I was grateful for and really started to expand on like, oh, I'm grateful for even the house, water, whatever it is. But I wanted to make sure I didn't just like cheat myself every single day. I wanted to give myself real gratitude. Okay. So I did 3 in the morning. I would rewrite down my goal, whatever my goal was, but I'd write my goals out every single morning. So I knew what I was shooting for, once again, and getting my brain prep. It is important when you're writing your goals to write them the same way every single time. Okay, to write them the same way every single time. Because when you start to change them, it sounds really weird, but there's like a disconnect that happens when you write your goals out differently. Like, oh, I don't know, I'm going to do a $200,000 branch. Okay, I'm going to do a 200K branch. I'm going to recruit this many people, but like making sure that I just write it the same way every single time, because I want this to be ingrained in my brain. One of my mentors said your goal should be so simple that like you can make it a hashtag, and that you could easily write these out every single time without even thinking about it. Hey, you could write your goals out. Like I could just tell Michelle, okay, cool, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, write down all your goals. So she'd be like, boom. And because she knows them, because she's written them down over and over and over again, or said them to herself over and over and over again. Okay, so she doesn't have to rethink of them. It's just part of her now. It's kind of like an of course mentality. Okay. And then I would write down my big 3, my today's targets of like, hey, what are 3 things that are really going to just move the needle forward? Okay. I could think of my large goal and then break that down by week and by day. Okay. But just 3 things that were going to move the needle forward. For me, it was just like, hey, if I did these 3 things, I won the day. And if I did these 3 things, I won the day. Because I am somebody that does get distracted with little tasks where I'm like cleaning my Google Drive or my email or something like that. I'm like, oh, it's really important because it's just so unorganized. I have to do it. But like, do I? No. So making sure I do tasks that like are really impacting my day. And so having those 3. And if I have time to do other stuff, awesome. But just like, what are my 3, my big 3? And then I had my evening routine where I would just write down my wins, all of my wins, every little win that I had, anything big or small, but every single one where I just get to hype myself up before I go to bed. Where I'm like, man, I did all this stuff. I accomplished this. Okay. And I think that's good. Okay. It's just a little place where you get to tell yourself how awesome you are. And sometimes it's hard at first because you're like, did I really I was okay at it. But like, yeah, no, you did it. You did it. That means you're great. It's a win. Okay. And I think it's important to sometimes celebrate not only our big wins, but even the little wins that we have, because I think we wait so long for something big to happen for us to celebrate, but you can celebrate the little things that happen too. Okay. Maybe for the first time you made 15 phone calls. Cool. That's a win. You made 15 phone calls in a day. And I made 10 phone calls. I got up earlier this morning. That's a win. These are all little wins. They don't have to be anything phenomenal or huge. Okay. But you can still celebrate that. And then I would finish my night also with a gratitude, just one gratitude. Okay. Like, hey, tonight I am grateful for blank. Okay. And that was pretty much how I would journal. But I think why this is really important, the most of it is really just for reflection. And the reason I like journaling, and like I said, it doesn't have to be in a morning or evening routine, but I have journals all over the place if you were here. But the reason I think journaling is so important because I have different ones of like, what am I feeling? And so I did this thing for about a month where an alarm would go off and I would just write down what I was feeling at that moment. Okay, so like 9 a.m. and I'd be like, okay, cool, this is what I'm feeling right now in this moment. Okay, and I could reflect though and look at each day and be like, hey, at 9 a.m., usually every day, I feel this way. Sometimes it's a positive, sometimes it's a negative, but I could also reflect and see how things sometimes changed my emotions and being more aware of like, oh, wow, I woke up feeling really good, but then by 2 o'clock, because, something happened at work, I wasn't feeling good anymore. And I could see how like my environment even started to change my emotions and starting to be more aware of like, well, why do I allow those things to happen? Hey, why can't I still just be happy? Even though this happened, it was like, that's an external force I had no control over. Okay. And not saying that I have to be happy all of the time, but realizing how things did control or shift my emotions, or even just reflecting on different ideas that I had or different ways that I was feeling, the goals that I had, how I wrote things out. I think reflection just as a whole is really, really valuable. And I think reflection as a whole and self-awareness, because it just allows us, I think, to really look back on our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And now we can look at ourselves with more curiosity and ask more curious questions. Okay. Ask more curious questions. And this is something I really started to do a lot this year. Is just asking myself questions, and not necessarily even questions that need an answer, but just questions in the sense of like, I want to get curious about what I'm doing. Okay. Well, like, what if this happened? And like something that happened to me earlier is when we had our best January ever, where I was like, oh man, this is insane. It's such a big month. And I just sat down for a bit and it just came to me where I wrote out everything. I'm like, well, what if we changed our goal? Hey, what would that look like? Hey, who would I have to be to do those things? And it's really just sitting there for me to just get curious about these questions. It's not necessary that I need an answer, that I'm trying to solve something. I just want to get curious. Okay. And I think reflection allows you to get curious about yourself because we begin to dig deeper. We can question a lot of things. Why do I feel this way? Where did these thoughts come from? What are these physical sensations? Okay. If some of you have been here enough, you've probably heard my emotional intelligence talk like 3 times now. Okay. And I talk about those things of like, but where did this feeling come from? Where did that stem from? What caused it? Okay. But I think you can 100% use reflection to sustain growth for yourself and continue to move yourself forward, because you can see, I think what makes you better and what also is your pitfall. And when you get curious in those things, I've even had a lot of mentors ask me of like, okay, well, like when I'm feeling good or doing good, it's like, okay, well, what caused that? What was the trigger for that? Where did that come from? Okay? Or even when I'm feeling bad, it's like, okay, well, where did that come from? What caused that? Because those are the even things that I can start to avoid. And these are things that I can start to spend more time on. Okay. I had a quote somewhere, but I don't have it perfect. So forgive me. But it was from the 15 commitments. The 15 commitments of conscious leadership book. And it basically talks about how people who reflect end up learning more about themselves. And it talks about a lot of millionaires are the ones who reflect 2 to 3 times a day, where most people usually reflect only 2 to 3 times a year. And it's usually when big events happen, maybe like New Year's or resolutions, things like that. But it's not a very often thing we do as, I guess, average people, where people who are higher up or, top level people are the ones who are thinking about this every single day and asking those curious questions all the time. Okay. So just get curious. I think that's a huge thing, and not self-critical. I think this is also important. Okay. Is that you shouldn't just be sitting here like, well, why am I bad at this? Or why did I do that? It's more of just like, okay, well, where did this come from? Okay. So once again, it's not a place of finding an answer. It's just asking a question. Okay. The way the book even talks about it is kind of like back when you were a kid, where you remember you ask why questions all the time. Well, why? Why is the sky blue? Why is this like this? Why is that like this? And it wasn't necessary for you to have an answer. You're just like, why? Somebody would give it to you and be like, okay, that was it. It was just fine. Okay. But you asked a lot of why questions, and kind of going back with that childlike curiosity, just like, well, why? I wonder why that is. Okay. And having wonder questions. That's what I was looking for, is wonder questions. I wonder why that is. Why is this like this? Okay. So I think journaling and reflection really, really help with that. And like I said, I keep journals for a whole bunch of stuff. You can always just start with one. You don't need one for everything, but I have like a what am I feeling one. I have my reflections and ideas when I talk to mentors or coaches, or when I just want to like get all my thoughts out there. And journaling doesn't have to be perfect. Journaling doesn't have to be like a specific way. And I think I figured that out after, because this is an old journal where I had it all broken down exactly how I wanted to. But sometimes I just don't like structure. I just want to be able to just journal and just write out my feelings. What's going on, little things. And I think that's why I started to keep different ones, and I don't really do it in the morning, but just having somewhere to put your thoughts where you can go back and look at these thoughts and feelings. So next one. Okay. So this one, it is a little bit more advanced, I will say, but I think it's something you could definitely start to implement as you dive more into this, is standard over schedule. Okay, standard over schedule. And I think this one fits a little bit more in the type of work that we do than in other places, but I still think it applies. I was even talking to my mom about this, as I said, since she works night shifts, is that my mom works 12-hour shifts from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And she still somehow every single day will find a way to get a workout in. Okay, whether that be her getting off of work, her waking up a little bit earlier, even if it's just 10 minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes, but every single day she will try to get a workout in. And for her, it's basically the same concept as standard over schedule, is that there's no way she could schedule, and I've tried, there's no way that even myself, I could schedule exactly every single day, every week, I'm going to work out at this time. Okay. Because then when it doesn't happen, then I feel bad. I'm like, oh man, I let myself down. I didn't get it done. Why am I like this? Blah, blah, blah. And you can start to like spiral in that sense. Okay. And so instead of, I'm not saying don't put it in an exact place, but sometimes having to look at your schedule and look at things and realize, okay, cool. It's maybe not going to go in the place that I want it to, where I want to get this stuff done, but I want to get it done regardless. Okay. And so I'm going to make sure I get it done no matter what. Okay, whether that be, I've heard people do their affirmations or evening routine where they're like out with friends and they get home at like 2 a.m. and they're still like, okay, cool. I gotta do my affirmations. I'm going to sit here, read my little book real quick before I go to bed, because that's just part of my routine now. It's just what I do. And I think when you have this mentality, instead of it becoming a routine, it's really just what you do now. It's just part of you. It's not like something you feel like you have to do or anything like that. It's just like, well, this is just what I do. It doesn't matter what time it is, how I'm feeling. I make sure I read, I make sure I journal, I meditate, whatever it is, whatever your little habits are. But I think that's an important thing, is realizing sometimes that it's not going to fit cookie cutter perfectly how you want it to. And I know for me, even I would do that, where like my morning routine is like from 6 a.m. to 7:30, and it's like in an exact order on how it's supposed to be. And it's like, oh, I don't have any time unless I do it right there. But I think sometimes being a little bit more flexible with yourself and just realizing, hey, I want to get a workout in, and I didn't get it in the morning, but I'm going to make sure I get it in the evening. I didn't read this morning, so I have a little gap in the afternoon. I'm going to make sure I read in the afternoon. I got to make sure I drink my water. I have to make sure I do whatever my standard is. And remembering that your standards are just what you tolerate. Okay, so it's not that you have to follow anybody else's standards. I mean, sometimes in work you do, but I think it is important to make sure that you create your own standards for yourself and what you want to tolerate. Okay, what do you want from yourself? What do you want to gain? This doesn't have to be working out every single day. Okay. For me, it's like I've figured out that I probably could work out every single day. Would I be like satisfied and happy? Probably not. So for me, it's more like a 5 times a week thing. Okay. If I work out 5 times a week, I won the week. Okay, and figuring out what your standards are. You guys have heard when you should like rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. And I think what's important for this standard is to ask yourself, what does a 10 look like? Okay, what does like a 7 look like? What does a 5 look like? A 3, a 1? Okay, and then what's your standard? Okay, if you're looking at the scale, then what's your standard? Okay, well, bare minimum, even if I'm not at my best, I want to be at a 5. Okay. So asking yourself what your standard is and creating that for yourself. And then once again, not falling below it. But even if you do, that's my last one here. Okay. is that our best days come after our worst. Okay, our best days come after our worst. How many of you have started like a diet or working out before and then fell off and you're like, well, I'll just start back up like at the beginning of the week. Okay. Well, once the weekend's over, I'll get back on it. Okay. And I know we've all done it because I know I do that all the time. Where I'm like, oh, well, yeah, you know what? I'll just take the whole weekend then. I'll just eat however I want, or I'll just do whatever I want and I'll just start back up on Monday. Okay. And so instead of what usually happens with that is that, you take the weekend and then the weekend becomes a week and the week becomes a month. And then you're like, oh man, how did I get here? And then you start over again, but then you like fall off and you're like beating yourself up. You're like, oh, I'll just start later so I can start fresh. So I can start clean because I messed up. Right. And so instead of like beating yourself up about messing up and be like, oh man, I messed up. Now I have to start all over. Well, it's okay. You messed up that one day. Just restart tomorrow. Okay. And not feeling like just because you messed up, everything's derailed and everything's completely the worst thing ever. Now you're like, oh no, I have to restart fresh. How could I do this? I think sometimes it's just, okay, it's fine. Your best days come after your worst. And you guys have probably even seen this working here. Okay, where you didn't have the best sales day, but like the next day was really great, or you didn't have this great sales week and where you sold like $100, but then the next week you sell 3,000. Okay. And it's because your best come after your worst. Okay. So instead of just like flowing with like, oh man, I messed up, let me just like sit in my mess. It's just like, okay, cool. Well, I messed up today. That's fine because that's what happens because I'm human. Okay. I'm supposed to mess up. I'm not going to be perfect every single day because that would be insane. Okay. And giving yourself grace in that of like, well, yeah, I'm going to mess up and that's okay. I can just start again tomorrow. Okay, because my best days come after my worst. And that can be an affirmation that you have for yourself. My best days come after my worst. Okay, why can't I just start again tomorrow? Okay, why do I have to wait until Monday? Okay, and I think this also then allows you to have grace throughout like your whole entire week. Okay, you know how usually people have, I know I keep using like fitness and exercise examples, I apologize, but when people have like cheat days when it comes to eating, where they're like, oh yeah, this is my cheat day, I'm just gonna go ham. Okay, and I think it's sometimes important where where the rest of the week people then are like, oh, I'm not gonna do anything, I can't eat a brownie because it's my cheat day. And it's like, well, why can't you eat a brownie? Why don't you just eat it now? And then you could just do what you want. And I'm not saying like break completely your habits or your diets or anything like that. But I think when you give yourself a little bit more grace in each day, you don't end up having that huge day where you like go completely insane and then fall off. Okay? Because if you tell yourself your whole entire week, oh, I can't have an Oreo because it's bad. And then you get to your cheat day, you're like, okay, well now I'm going to have the whole pack of Oreos. Well, that's where you feel a little bad and the guilt comes from, because you're like, well, I couldn't have one then, but I'm going to go crazy today. And now you feel like, oh, I probably shouldn't have done that. Okay. And then that's where like the guilt comes from. And then you start to spiral because you feel guilty. You feel bad. You're like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Okay. Where instead of just having a little bit more grace each day, have the Oreo or two each day, because it's still going to be less than you having a whole entire pack in that one day. Okay. And I think that's the same thing in anything else, where you give yourself a little grace each day. And even if you do fall off, that's okay, because it was probably supposed to happen anyway. Okay. The 15 commitments talks about that a little bit as well, is that sometimes we fall off of our flow or we drift, and it's okay if you drift. It's more asking yourself, okay, cool. Am I ready to shift back up? Okay. Am I ready to shift back to where I was? And I know that was a lot of stuff that I threw at you guys really fast, but it kind of gave me a broad topic when they said personal growth. So, but those are pretty much all the biggest tips that I have. And some more just wrapping up is, like I said, going over all the things is biggest one is ask for feedback. I think that's the first place that I would go to. Once again, I wish I could quote it for you guys, but someone stole my book. Actually, I have 2 copies of this book and both of them got stolen. So but yeah, I know it's what happens when you loan it. It's clearly too good. So but I wish I could quote it for you guys, but it does have that template in there. Like I said, I'll get it for you guys. Go through, ask for feedback, send that email blast out and be like, hey, what could I improve on? Where do you think my areas of improvement are? And send it to different people. I think that is the important part, is different people, because they can give you feedback from different areas of your life. Because maybe you act one way while you're here, you act a different way at a different job, you act a different way with your family, significant others, teachers, whatever it is. And so I think it's important to get feedback from all different facets of your life, because you'll get to see how other people even see you. And once again, not being detrimental with this, like, oh my God, everybody hates me. It's like, no, well, you asked for feedback, but also I'm like, okay, cool. Where could I improve? Okay. Where are the themes? What keeps coming up? Okay. And then maybe even just taking one of those things, be like, okay, cool. This one thing is what I could improve on. Creating a routine, like I said, even keeping it simple, I think is really good for us. The seek water, seek sunlight, seek movement, okay, of keeping it really simple. And as you get better with your routine and you feel like you're really gaining stuff, you can add things. Okay. Keeping a journal, whether this be for your routine or just in general, okay, just to express thoughts, to reflect, get emotions out. Okay. I mean, I've always said that we are very emotional beings. And so I think sometimes just having a place to get that out. Sometimes you don't want to express it to everybody, but just having a place where you can get all your thoughts out. You guys have probably heard the exercise that you can do where you can write a letter to somebody, and not one that you're going to send, just a letter to get all your emotions out, and then you can like throw it away so that you got all your emotions out. I think it's the same thing when you get a journal, is that you just get all your emotions out and you're like, oh man. And sometimes just that sole act allows you to just feel better. Okay. So get a journal so that you can reflect, get curious. Get curious probably should have been its own little slide because it's one of my favorites, but just getting curious and asking wonder questions. Ask yourself why, how, where did this come from? Okay. Standard over schedule. Okay. Standard over schedule is that sometimes it's not going to be perfect where it needs to go. Okay. But if you have a commitment to yourself, I think that's important to follow through with it. And this is actually usually why we do fall off. Now I'm going to go on a tangent, but this is why we usually do fall off. As it even talks about that in the book of integrity breaches, is that most of the time we feel a lot better doing things for other people. And like if Jordan asked me, hey, Christina, could you do this? I probably would follow through with that, like no hesitation. And it's just because I want to help other people. It's a lot easier for us to break things and commitments with ourselves. Okay, like when I told myself, oh, I'm going to wake up at this time, and then I did it. Okay. And that's actually why we fall off, is because you're creating integrity breaches where your mind starts to correlate. Like whenever you say these things, you probably even feel it in the back of your head too, where you're like, oh, I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. tomorrow. And your brain's like, no, you're not. It's just because, well, you've continued to do it. Okay, you've actually now taught your brain that you're not going to do it. And you've created these integrity breaches. And these actually are a lot more detrimental than integrity breaches with other people, because you're now breaking that relationship with yourself. You're breaking that standard and commitment with yourself. Okay. And so I think that's an important one to make sure you try to keep. Okay. And then the best days after your worst, okay, is that we are human. We're going to mess up, and it is okay. Basically what that one is. I mean, we're human, we're gonna mess up, and it's okay. It doesn't mean that you've fallen off, or that you've made huge mistakes, or it's detrimental, or you can't get back to where you were. It's just your best days come after your worst. Cool, just get back up and we'll just try again. Okay, you've drifted. Are you ready to shift now? So those are my thoughts. Questions, comments, concerns, snide remarks, emotional outbursts, feedback. I do love feedback.
Okay, I have something. So I really liked when you said that, okay, I didn't like it, but it's a lot easier for us to break commitments with ourselves, right? Integrity breaches. That's something that I'm kind of struggling with right now. And you said that we've kind of taught our brain, when something like that happens, we've taught our brain that we're not going to do it. What would you say, like the first step for like reprogramming yourself? Like, hey, yeah, you can believe yourself, that you can believe that what you say is what you're actually going to do. What would you say to do something like that?
For me personally, the first step that I do is I do like to journal things out and kind of re-go over my commitments and like find, it's not even, I guess, I know everybody says find your why first, but I think it's more of just like, what am I getting excited about? Like, why did I want to do this in the first place? So I guess it is kind of like the finding your whys in that sense, but it's just re-going over my commitments. What was so exciting about this in the first place? And then sometimes even finding, I guess you could call it like a sub why. Like I had a goal where, what's it called? I want our office obviously to do well, but then I accidentally found a sub goal when I was like looking at reports where I wanted to be the #1 Christina in the nation, which sounds like a very odd goal. But I just thought it was cool because I saw those 3 other Christina managers and I was like, huh, I want to be the #1. It was just like an odd goal that like really motivated me, not necessarily to be the best or be #1, but I just wanted to be like, in this sense, the best. And it was more exciting than the actual physical number of like 100K or 200K. Just sometimes finding your goal, but then finding like a sub goal underneath it actually gets you more excited. And so those little things as well, of like re-journaling them out. Okay. And then the book has a couple tips. I might be able to find one because I read this a while ago. And I should have reread that section before I gave this talk, but you know. Anyway, let's see. Commitment, integrity. It is commitment 6, by the way, if you do get this book. So it's 15 commitments of conscious leadership. Highly recommend. I love this thing. I would probably reread this 4 times. It's fantastic. So anyway, let's go into it. Can't believe I'm just going to read for a key staff meeting.
I'm done with it. That's cool.
Okay, here it is. Okay, so it says the 4 pillars of integrity is basically taking 100% responsibility. Okay, speak authentically to yourself, feel feelings through to completion, and then the impeccable agreements. Okay, so making, I guess, clear agreements and clear commitments for yourself. Okay, so this is what I was talking about when you're being precise with your goals, is like, it's so simple, it could be a hashtag. I think when you overcomplicate them, that's when your brain's like, oh, I can't keep track of everything. So just making them very simple. Okay, keeping your agreements, obviously, renegotiating agreements, and then cleaning up broken agreements. So what you are more needing probably is the cleaning up broken ones. Okay. So it talks about to stay impeccable, you have to clean up broken agreements, which usually sound like, hey, I told you I would talk to Kathy by Friday about the change in her role, and I want to let you know that I didn't keep my agreement with you, and I realized breaking this agreement could damage trust with you, and I want to know if there's anything I can do to repair that. Okay, and so sometimes even explaining to yourself of like what happened. I think even talking to yourself of like, hey, giving myself some grace. I said I was going to do this. I did not follow through with it, but what could I do to even make it up to myself? Okay, but taking 100% responsibility, I think, is important there. Of I know I dropped the ball. Okay, how can I just like pick the ball back up? How can I get back on track? I hope that helped.
Yeah, for sure. I like that last part too, because like I'm just thinking about if I were to ever like break an agreement with a friend or something like that, like you just have a conversation with them and you're just like, hey, I know I did this. What can I do now moving forward now that that's already happened? And just like realizing that we're also our friends kind of thing. Like, even though it's a weird thing to say, but just understanding that. I liked it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's always something, is that we should talk to ourselves like we talk to friends, is that a lot of times we do not talk to ourselves how we would talk to a friend, and we would not be friends with us if we talk to somebody that way, the same way we talk about ourselves. So I do think that's important, of treating that agreement the same way. So,
cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Michelle, I don't know if you had a question. I know you unmuted. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on kind of what you opened with about being selfish. I'm kind of like you, where I do a lot of supporting of other people. At least that's how my life has gone since I was a kid. Something was said to me a few years ago, actually, by my boss, and I'm sure it's a quote he got from somewhere. He's smart, but he's not that smart. He told me that I needed to learn to give from my plate instead of from my cup. That if you are constantly giving from your cup is going to end up empty, which is what was happening to me. I was doing things for everybody else, and at the end of the day, I didn't do anything for myself. Or he said, if I fill my cup first, and what overflows onto the plate underneath, that's what I should be giving, so that I never end up with an empty cup.
No, I like that.
Yeah, awesome. Me too. So I always think about that when I start seeing myself emptying my cup. Like, slow down, fill yourself back up before you give out everything that you have. So that was it.
Thank you. I like that. I like the share. Yeah, I did talk about in the beginning of being selfish. I think that's important. And it kind of talks something similar about that in the book of when you're taking radical responsibility is people sometimes fall into 3 roles, where there is a victim, villain, and hero mindset, which are all bad, by the way. I know the hero one doesn't sound like it, but or the victim one, you guys can probably already understand that mindset of like, oh, well, if they wouldn't have done this, then I would have been able to complete my job. If they didn't do this, I would have been able to do this, blah, blah, blah. There's the villain, which you can either make yourself the villain or you can have somebody else be the villain. So it's basically that if they hadn't done this, they're the villain in your mindset. You can even say, oh, if I wouldn't have dropped the ball, then things wouldn't have happened. Which is also the hero mentality, is where you're taking your responsibility, but you're also not allowing others to take responsibility for their actions. You're taking on theirs. You're like, oh, well, you know, I know the victim is really struggling, so I'll take on their stuff as well. And so now a lot of people reward this behavior where they're like, oh man, this is what it takes to be a really good employee. This is what it takes to be like a top level person, where really you're not. You're actually allowing other people to continue to not take responsibility for their own actions, and you're taking more than you need to. That you should just take responsibility for your own things, but then also allowing other people to take responsibility for what they need to. And this is why I do talk about being selfish, is because you don't have to save everybody. I know we want to, especially in roles that we're in most of the time, in leadership roles, is we want to help everybody. We want to save everybody. We want to fix them, but we just can't. And sometimes we do have to focus on ourselves first. We have to make sure that our cup is filled, because if not, you have nothing to give. And most of these people are not giving it back either. Okay, so if they're in a victim mindset, it's not like they're giving it back to you. So your cup is just empty, and theirs is still probably empty as well, because they're not doing anything with this. Okay, because we're allowing them to continue in the mindset and the responsibility that they're doing. So my final thoughts and just little tidbits I have from this book. Any other comments, questions, concerns, snide remarks?
So when it comes to journaling, I overthink it, and I sit down and I'm like, what do I write? What do I say? Like, am I writing it to somebody? And like, I overthink it sometimes so much that like, I'll do it once and then it'll be like weeks before I do it again. And it's like trying to like break that, like stop thinking about what you're going to write and just write what, you know, what's going on in your head. Like that is that's something I struggle with.
I think sometimes even having a little guideline for yourself can help. Of like, sometimes I write to my future self because I know I'm going to look back on it. So I'm like, okay, you know, and it's weird because I'm writing like, to future Christina or whatever like that. But I think sometimes it is important because I do the same thing. I'm like, well, what do I want to write? How do I want to write it? Is this a diary? Is this like, what is this? Like a dear journal? And it's kind of odd when you're like thinking so hard of what you want to do or how you want to do it, where sometimes it doesn't even have to be structured, where it can literally just be like, okay, hey, I have these thoughts. I'm just going to put them down on paper real quick. And I've even done that. But if you are, I think sometimes starting with structure helps, of like having a little template for yourself. The only reason I like moved away from it is because I started to get bored of doing the same thing every single time, where I was like, okay, and it felt then monotonous, not really like I was actually gaining anything from it. But sometimes starting with a little outline, kind of like how I had it, and then taking the best parts of that outline. Of like, okay, cool. I really like when I get to write my goals every single morning in my big 3. Okay. And I think gratitudes are important, but sometimes you could just say your gratitudes out loud. Okay. I really just want to write how I was feeling at the end of the day. I want to do a whole reflection on my day. And you can start to figure out the pieces that you like the most, but having a template at first can sometimes help break that little barrier. And then
I find that for me, it's very helpful. Like, I just start off by rambling and then I get more precise as I start writing, and then I elaborate more upon that topic. So that's what helps me the most, because I don't really have a goal at the beginning, but then I find one. It's the same as with like, I'm in college, so I do a lot of writing. So it's like sometimes I just need to like start rambling and not care about what I'm writing, and I'll grab the important bits from it as I like progress through the writing process. So what one thing that's been helpful is like just say like barf your words onto the paper. Just barf it onto the paper and then grab the important bits, because the main thing is just writing. That's the thing. Yes. That's the thing that you're just trying to do. So that's
No, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Alice. And I think that's always been a big thing now for me, is that I'm just like, writing everything up, but as I'm writing, I've told some people this, I've had revelations literally while I'm writing, because I start to ask myself curious questions while I'm writing, where I'm putting this out and I'm like, whoa, well, what would that look like? And I've come to a lot of different revelations as this happens, but it's a very cool process. So sometimes just rambling helps. But like I said, if you're struggling with that because you're like, well, I don't want to ramble, I think structure does help a little bit. And then you can kind of move into that. So, any other questions? Comments, concerns, snide remarks. I do like this little interaction and engagement that we're having. I think it's fun to finish this out.
This is my first key staff meeting.
Okay.
Is this normal?
It depends. I'm a very interesting manager.
Okay.
But yeah, so usually my talks are very personal growth, emotional intelligence oriented, so that I like feedback at the end of my talk. So that we do this a lot at the end of mine. Does everybody else? I don't know. I don't think so. For those of you that have been on key staff multiple times, would you say that this is normal? No. Okay, no. But there's still a lot of good topics. Okay, there are a lot of like good things for you guys to gain from. They're more Cutco related for you to grow and get better in the business, and then we just add on top so that you can get better outside of the business. So, good question. Anything else before we wrap up here? Nope. Yes.
I appreciate this. Thank you, everybody.
Of course, of course. Well, we are pretty much, I'm all set and done. So if you guys just want to go ahead and post your light bulbs, either in your respective chats or the TLA chat, you definitely can. But it was a pleasure getting to meet some new faces as well, and some old faces that I love seeing you guys already all the time. So yeah, you guys are great. You guys are great. Anyway, go do great things in your offices. Have an awesome day. Enjoy your weekend, and I will talk to you soon. If you need anything, I'm in almost all of the office WhatsApps, so you can always text me if you need anything.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Christina, we're familiar faces, not old faces.
This is true. You're correct.
Remember who you've. Have a good day.
You as well.
Bye.
Bye, Michelle.
And then I do have a question. I don't believe that I'm in